Confused by the bombastic barrage of national and international economic, political, and social news? Tired of the daily drivel of sound bites and talking heads? Do you want the truth about economic, political, and social issues from a Christian perspective? Welcome to Christian Economic Perspective, hosted by Oliver Burrows, an ordained minister, college professor, and the executive editor of economictruth.org. Each week, you will hear an hour of cutting-edge analysis, explanations, interviews, and answers to your questions. Now here's your host, Oliver Burrows.
Good morning and welcome to a very special broadcast, a special edition of Christian Economic Perspective. We're going to be talking today about the system of justice. And our guest today, former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz, author of the new book, In Pursuit of Justice. And Sheriff, welcome to Christian Economic Perspective, and thank you for making the time to join us.
Well, good morning, Reverend Oliver. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I did not know anything about your background until something popped up in one of my email addresses, and it said, former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz, self-published In Pursuit of Justice, and I immediately started to track you down. You now live in the sunny confines of Florida, but God did not make you a dummy. You know it's a little warmer down there than here, but then you come north and you brought some of the warm weather with you, didn't you?
Yes, we did. It was quite an experience, although it's probably 10 degrees warmer back home.
Well, I've got to ask you this. We hear so many people talk about wanting to be something when they were younger. Talk to us a little bit. You know, I think you probably, like most of us, started out as a child and moved forward from there. Talk to us a little bit about what led you into what I believe is a professional calling, just as ministering is a spiritual calling. What led you into the professional calling of law enforcement?
Well, going back to about 1949, as far back as I can remember, I was one of 12 born on a 220-acre dairy farm just to the southern tip of Marathon County. Walking barefoot was a way of life at that time. We were not a rich family by any means. So, it all started, I guess. The seed was planted back then. I was about 8 years old, riding into town to shop the staples for the family with my parents, and I noticed a new billboard along the highway, and that was quite a depiction that stayed with me a long time. And it was a large sign with a police officer in a blue uniform leaning down to a little boy, handing him a popsicle. And that really painted a different picture as to how law enforcement was portrayed at that time. It was always believed that if you see the red lights behind you, you're certainly in trouble. If you run into a police officer, it's because he has to take you into custody and such, and it was something to fear. After that, it started to paint a little different picture in my heart as to how human the situation can be.
As you grew up then, was this a goal? I mean, you're on a dairy farm. I don't know where you were in the order of the 12, if you were the youngest, somewhere in the middle or toward the front end. But as you grew up then, did that different view of law enforcement officers, if you will, the seed was sown with that billboard, begin to germinate within you?
I think it stayed in my subconscious. As I grew up, I had people to look up to. I had a brother that went into the Marine Corps when I was rather young, and it was quite gratifying to see him come back. Built like a football player and really in top shape. And he was in during the Berlin crisis, and he never went into action. The situation was settled before the ship got there. But I always looked up to him, and I really thought it was outstanding as to what he was doing and how he looked and how he behaved when he came back. He just seemed like a totally changed man. Too was one of the seeds, I think, to end up where I did. It wasn't until after I served in the military, went to Korea and returned, that I really took a serious look at what I wanted to do in life, and law enforcement was still stamped in my heart, and so I pursued it.
So you come back from Korea. When did you get your first opportunity then in law enforcement?
Well, I went back to Milwaukee to my job that I left when I went into the military, and I started taking some courses with Milwaukee Tech, Lincoln Extension Institute, such, to better myself and prepare. I was hired in Ozaukee County as a part-time deputy, working primarily weekends and such, at special events and occasions. And an opportunity arose in Portage County where deputies were being hired. I applied. I went through the process of interviews and testing, and eventually was hired as a deputy there in late 1968.
Now, as you go through this time, what was the interview, the testing, and the selection process then, Sheriff? Was it much more basic than it is now, or was it still a very detailed process of testing and interviewing?
Well, the process of screening and interviewing was pretty intense, simply because Portage County had a really good reputation when it came to law enforcement and their position in the state of Wisconsin. In fact, when I was hired, I believe there were 160 applicants, so it was quite a process to thin out the people that were least likely, and narrowing it down to 5 or 6, and eventually interviewed by the law enforcement committee of the county board in Portage County, and then the sheriff, and then consequently being appointed deputy. It was quite different back then. Most of the law enforcement to that point was on-the-job training, if you will. However, back then, Wisconsin pursued a more advanced training and preparation. NCTI in Wausau, in fact, is where I attended the first law enforcement training, and that was about an 8-week venture that went into life-saving measures, law enforcement tactics, and behavioral experiences and such, and it went from there.
So, it basically, 1968 is the beginning of your career in Portage County, and the experiences you'd had down in Milwaukee area, part-time Ozaukee, did you find a big difference between being in Milwaukee area when you moved to Portage County?
Well, Milwaukee was a metropolitan area, as you know, and we dealt with large groups at dances and occasions and such. Portage County was more intense in that a deputy was involved in everything. That person had to be, trained in first aid. One that had to deal with psychology and dealing with family issues and such, bar fights, severe auto accidents, extrication, CPR and like. So it was quite adventurous in the first year, in particular, to be able to learn all the necessities that a deputy carries with him out there, because it's not like a police force in which you have a congested population with a large group of people that can respond to assist one another. We worked a 3-man crew covering 810 square miles, one of which on a rotation basis would run the county jail and dispatch. So you had 2 people on patrol. Your backup was 35 to 40 minutes away in an emergency. So when it came to severe altercations, bar fights, severe accidents and such, you were pretty much on your own. and you depended on assistance from the public, and we got a lot of that. So it's a combination of having to deal with major situations on your own.
Again, this is Christian Economic Perspective. I'm your host, Oliver Burrows. Very special broadcast today with author of In Pursuit of Justice, former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. You can get the book, Amazon.com. And when we come back, Sheriff, we want to talk about one portion of the book and your dealings with an extreme group, the Posse Comitatus. We'll be back in 2+. Don't go away. Welcome back to Christian Economic Perspective. I'm your host, Oliver Burrows. Very special broadcast today, In Pursuit of Justice, authored by former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. And Sheriff, one of the things that was certainly by no means the only part of a very extended career, but one part that a lot of people have forgotten about that I think we need to revisit as we live in the times that we do in this country, and that is the time that the Posse Comitatus in Tigerton Dells was in operation. Now, this was outside of your jurisdiction in Portage County. Were you still a deputy at that time, or tell us a little bit of how you'd gotten through the ranks and your career had progressed by the time you were involved with the posse?
No, I was first elected sheriff in 1978, taking office in January of 1979. And shortly thereafter, I was elected by the sheriffs and the chiefs of police of the Northeast region as the mutual aid director. And that's a program that was established before my time in conjunction and in support of the governor, who would then reimburse the counties for their expenses in dealing with large civil disorders or large catastrophes. So that's the way I got involved. I was contacted by the sheriff in Shawano County, who was facing a great deal of pressure from the county board, town board, judges, if you will, in Shawano County. And we decided to find a way. We had to concentrate an effort on finding a way of shutting down an illegal operation in Tigerton Dells. It was a fenced area with several homes and meeting place and a school. It was one in which the posse felt that they, by the Constitution, had created their own township, the constitutional township of Tigerton Dells. And it was against all regulations, certainly when it came to building code and such. So we started to build a program where we needed to find a way to get them out of there. We were in contact with the governor on a ongoing basis, who was Tony Earl at that time, who was very concerned about bloodshed and needless military-type confrontation. So we eventually did set up a meeting with the posse in which I went there alone. I felt that the sheriff was somewhat protected in that the Posse Comitatus preached the fact that they were there by the right of the Constitution. And since the sheriff and governor are the only two officers mentioned in the Wisconsin Constitution, I felt that I had some protection from violence in terms of the posse, and had an open door type of possibility in negotiating something with them to avoid bloodshed.
If I may interject something here, Sheriff, I remember, because I came to Wisconsin in late '79, was living in Appleton, but by the time I moved to Clintonville, when I got married in 1981, I'd followed this, and I remember the great pressures that the Shawano County Sheriff was under and how liens were being filed against government officials. And I remember very vividly that he was so concerned that he'd asked for, in his 1980 budget, an armored personnel carrier, which, of course, was a military-style vehicle, no questions asked. He didn't get it. As I recall, he did not win election again. But this was a very, very tense time in the history of the state and in Shawano County. Yet as the president of the Mutual Aid Group, you went in, and as I've read excerpts of your book, you went in unarmed?
Yes, I did. We got a meeting set up. I won't go into detail because that's going to take too much of our time, but we were able to get a meeting set up with some of the heads of the posse right there in the compound. So one night I drove out there after having set this meeting time and place. It was at one of the houses inside the compound, which was fenced and chained and such, and met with some of the leaders there and tried to convince them that bloodshed isn't necessary. This situation has to be removed. It's there illegally. They have to go through the same process as any other citizen in building a home, establishing residency and such. They were against taxation as well and really hated the federal government. And I had contact with the FBI during the process. And this all followed about 3 years prior to that there was a shooting or shootout in Wounded Knee, South Dakota, if you recall.
Yes, I do.
In which there was one federal agent, one agent from the FBI, and 2 U.S. Marshals killed, and that person escaped to Arkansas, and there was a second shootout in which 2 more Marshals were killed before the man was taken down, and he was killed there. Martyred for the posse is our belief. The next man stepped forward to take command of the posse, was jailed on tax evasion charges. He was held in the county jail, during which solidarity was shown by the posse members. They would have a chain of automobiles that circled the courthouse and jail in Shawano, and in showing their solidarity for him. So I suggested we transfer him out, which was accomplished. He was transferred to Milwaukee and held in the jail there. And during my communication with him while he was in the jail in Milwaukee, set up this particular meeting at the household, which I felt we needed to do, and the governor begged me to do everything possible to avoid bloodshed. And we got nowhere with the meeting. I had made arrangements with the sheriff in Shawano to have armed deputies available with shotguns that would come in to get me if I wasn't out of the compound in 45 minutes. Well, the meeting finished in about 35 minutes, and I left the compound, and the gentleman that escorted me back out to the gate chained the gate, and I went to the sheriff's office and discussed with him, how serious the situation is and how adamant they are about staying there. During the course of this meeting, I was warned that we would walk knee deep in blood should we try to force them out, and a second person in the room said or challenged me in terms of firepower, that they're not carpet salesmen. These are trained militia, and they're very well trained, very well armed, and we would be up against a catastrophic exchange. I argued you got men, women, and children in this compound. You're going to expose your families to this type of danger. I said it just doesn't make any sense, but they were very adamant about it. So the situation led to laying out a plan as to how we could accomplish this, and It had to be by surprise and had to be done in great force to get the people out of there, hopefully keeping the injuries and deaths to a minimum. We knew what the dangers were. We carefully picked sheriffs and deputies in the regions that had SRTs. Those are special response teams that are well trained to deal with situations like that. And using one local deputy from Shawano County who carried the eviction papers and court orders to vacate, approach a house and backed by a six-man team, well-trained officers there to protect him. So we went to the compound at 4:30 in the morning after cutting the chain to the entrance. We had with us, by the way, two men with tranquilizer guns because the compound was guarded by German shepherds that walked guard rather than people. We felt that we might have to take those dogs down to accomplish the mission. Well, that never had to be. As it turned out, the very first house on which the local deputy knocked on the door and was ready to hand the papers to the individual, the owner of the house, who was their military leader, came to a screen wall in front of the house, if you can envision that. It's a screened area like a porch with a concrete floor. And because we had cut the power to the source before we went in, so that there was no communications and such to call in their backups and such, this person came to the screen, peering through, squinting, trying to identify who's out there, and he cussed a little bit. Well, the rather large deputy reached through the screen, grabbed him by the neck, and pulled him to the ground, pulled him out. And thank God he did. There were 7 rifles on the concrete floor facing outward. 2 were on bipods, and 1 was belt-fed. So if that person had gotten to those weapons, my God, it could have been catastrophic.
Again, this is Christian Economic Perspective. I'm your host, Oliver Burrows. My very special guest on this special broadcast, retired Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. His book, In Pursuit of Justice. You can get it at Amazon.com. And when we come back, Sheriff, want to complete the story of what happened when facing the Posse Comitatus and talk a little bit more about your career. We'll be back in 2+. Don't go away. Welcome back to Christian Economic Perspective. I'm your host, Oliver Burrows. Very special broadcast today, In Pursuit of Justice. My guest, former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz, and that's the title of his book, In Pursuit of Justice. You can get it at Amazon.com. Sheriff, as you were describing before the break, the deputy, the Shawano County deputy who had the legal responsibility to hand out the notices, how close it came because he used certainly non-lethal force, disrupting what you'd already attempted to disrupt by cutting power, getting past the German shepherds. Humorously put, I don't know if you used Omaha steaks or what, but you obviously didn't have to use the weapons. Now what happens in the compound, because you've obviously served what's next, because seeing what you saw then, you must have figured that there were other places with other people very well armed waiting for you, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we confronted every household simultaneously with a SRT, and that's the special response team, along with the deputy that served the papers. Now, he was instructed to knock on the door, hand the papers to the first individual that came to the door, and the team was to follow in very quickly and remove the people to get them away from the arms, to bring them outside. And it was one of the members of that team that, in fact, he was a deputy from Portage County, that reached through the screen and pulled the individual out and on the ground. Well, in that case, that was the only occupant of that particular house, and the dogs came in behind the deputies as they entered the house, and one pulled the refrigerator door open and found a T-bone steak on a plate. So it was very quick action on his part. He turned around, handed it to the first shepherd that came in, and that dog took the steak outside, began to devour it. Apparently, they were hungry, and he found a bowl of hot dogs that he was tossing to the other two shepherds that accompanied the first. And after that, the dogs followed the deputies around looking for more food. Well, all these houses were hit exactly the same way and exactly at the same time. So we were, God had to be out there with us, protecting us, because every house was cleared in 34 minutes. And every person was outside the house, some in pajamas and you name it, but we had to devise a way of getting them away from the weapons and ammunition.
Given what we've seen elsewhere, you talked about Wounded Knee, we know about Waco, while the scope in those cases and the conditions were different. From the governor on down, was there ever discussion of having to bring in the National Guard and have a greater show of force? Because you put your life on the line when you went in, even with an arranged meeting, unarmed, with people who, as later found out, had hundreds of AK-47, AR-47 rifles, and I'm sure someone counted it, rounds of ammunition. You definitely put yourself in harm's way from the outset, correct, Sheriff?
Well, in the process of meeting with the governor at his mansion in Madison, he brought together the heads of state and literally appointed them at our disposal. And the National Guard commander was there, as a matter of fact, and he pleaded that he can bring 1,000 people together in a matter of hours, and that the governor would sign that order if necessary. And I told him that's the last thing in the world we need, simply because I envision us sending a military group to a group that believes that they're a military, they're a militia, afforded by the Constitution. Now you've got an all-out war, two armies, and I said that's the last thing we need. I told him that if we needed a personnel carrier, I would appreciate that, but it wasn't necessary. The DNR was there, the head of the State Patrol was there. And, I indicated that we could probably use some of the personnel from each. The game wardens, if you will, out in the countryside, being very accustomed to working in those conditions, that we might use in terms of surveillance and such. The State Patrol using some of the troopers to block and assist in traffic away from the compound to protect, keep the public away, to protect them from what might come down. I insisted that every person within the scope of the operation on the interior had to be sheriffs and deputies because of what the posse preached, that they were there as their right within the Constitution to create a militia and to protect themselves against, corrupt government, such that I felt that the sheriff would be the last person they would want to harm, because it would destroy every conceivable effort on their part to convince the public that they're within their rights within the Constitution, you see.
So in making this decision, was there at any point in time, and I know I'm asking a very personal question, where you feared for your safety?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But, I was born and raised a religious boy and then a religious man. I believe in God. I think doing the right things afford a certain amount of protection, especially if if it's there to protect innocent individuals, then that's the public. I really felt that should a person go down in a situation like this, what better way to go. My father taught me how to deal with living and dying, and his perception of dying was you only have to do it once, and you need to be prepared for it, So, I took that to heart, certainly, and there were many times which I was very fearful. If you could find the shorts I wore back then, you could probably find racing stripes on some. But all in all, we had to show some amount or sort of bravery on part of the public because they depended on us. And we're a reflection of what they are. We're a reflection of what they need and want, So, protection is our responsibility, and, we need to take the bullet. If you want to look at it from a ridiculous standpoint, the whole idea of wearing that uniform, that shield, and that gun is a reflection of what the population is. So it's our job to deal with the bad guys and to keep the public from harm's way.
As you look at the results of this, do you believe that by taking the constitutional approach that you did, seeking negotiations unarmed, not bringing a matching or exceeding show of force, led to the successful, if you will, conclusion? Nobody got killed, nobody got hurt, justice was served. Do you think that this is the result of taking that constitutional approach?
I do believe it was, absolutely. The only leg that they have to stand on is their position. They really believed that they were within their constitutional right, that they didn't have to be forced to pay taxes. They didn't have to respond to federal agents. In fact, they would post signs that federal agents will be shot if they cross that line. Well, they demonstrated that in Wounded Knee and Arkansas, So we knew how serious the situation was, and I think using the diplomatic approach worked. We kept them off guard. They really thought that, I believe that they really thought that we were going to negotiate, forever if that's what might be necessary. But we started to put a plan together, and in the midst of doing that, there was a meeting called by the posse where the FBI afforded us surveillance, aerial surveillance, in which they saw license plates from all over the country come into the compound on a Sunday. And we were warned, in fact, by the FBI that they really strongly felt that the posse was onto us, and they're putting together a plan in preparation for our attempt to oust them.
Again, this is Christian Economic Perspective. I'm your host, Oliver Burrows. A very special broadcast today, In Pursuit of Justice, the book, former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. You can get it at Amazon.com. And when we come back, Sheriff, want to wrap up briefly your career and talk about some of the applications of situations like you faced with the posse as we deal with terror-type groups today.
Okay.
We'll be back in 2+. Don't go away. Welcome back to Christian Economic Perspective. I'm your host, Oliver Burrows. Very special broadcast today, In Pursuit of Justice. The book is written by former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz, available through Amazon.com. Obviously, Sheriff, when you come through a situation like this, a very protracted situation, you have a peaceful, bloodless solution. Was that one of the high points of your career?
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. It gives me shivers every time I think about it, as to what could have happened, what might have happened, and how fortunate we were that, careful planning and preparation and, doing what we could and doing our very best to peacefully resolve the situation. It all came together, and it all worked out, thank God.
And amen to that, because we know that there was a component of those within the compound who believed they, too, were Christians, a certain view of Christianity that I've examined. But when you looked at it and you saw what needed to be done to keep those who were truly innocent, some of them who may have even been hostages in their own mind to the posse's views, and you roll forward through your career, when did you finally conclude your time as sheriff in Portage County and retire?
In 1987, January of 1987.
So you have been away from law enforcement now for almost 30 years, but as you look at the situations we're facing now, just this past week with a single individual, now 5 Marines dead, when we take a look at some of the other activities, whether they are domestic terrorism, foreign terrorism, or just unspeakable horrors with the conviction of the Colorado theater shooter. And you look at these things, and you look at what law enforcement is facing now, compared to even the toughest situation you had with the posse. Is it much, much more difficult for law enforcement today than it was in 1987 and earlier?
Well, I really think it is. I think, there are several situations that I see that are really affecting good law enforcement. You've seen it in Missouri. You saw it in South Carolina. In situations where you have some rogue cops, plain and simple. And there are a few that will step over the line and make it look awfully bad for everybody. And with today's media process, they're onto it so fast and report so quickly that oftentimes there is a trial by media, if you will, before the person is even brought to justice, before the investigation is complete. But in those cases, like in South Carolina, where the individual is running away from the officer and was shot in the back, certainly you treat that like you would any other criminal element. That officer has to stay within the bounds. And I think where we're missing the boat a little bit over time, because we've become so automated and such. If you look inside of a squad car today, you see the GPSs, the radars, the computers. There's no reason to have to leave that automobile. In many cases, I think we need to concentrate an effort on getting back to the days of walking beats and getting to know the public. In one way, it's becoming or it's beginning to look like an us against them syndrome. And we need to get that closer to the public. And I know a lot of departments, particularly here, work on that very seriously. With the school program, starting with the very young children, breaking or taking down that fence, take away that fear, because they are a reflection of the public, of that population, and those children start to be instilled with a feeling of love and friendship when they see a law enforcement officer, as opposed to fear.
Much like the billboard you saw when you were 8 years old.
Exactly.
Now, go ahead. No, go ahead, Sheriff.
I'm sorry. if you turn the clock back some, especially in the major populations and such, you had officers walking beats. You had, you really had some close communication with law enforcement people, and the kids begin to respect that at an early age. They love that uniform as opposed to fear it. They should never fear that.
Going back to the issue of the media, I remember the coverage of the Posse during that period of time. Today, I think, and I see it across the board in media, and if you will, IR it, there's the ready, report, aim, or sometimes report, aim, ready. We don't get to the story, verify the facts, and stick to the facts because someone else may beat us to it, and then we have to end up either have retractions, corrections, or starting over when we don't get it right. Was that one of the challenges you faced as the head of the team dealing with the Posse and dealing with the media even then?
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest concerns we had was leaks back then. In terms of the word getting back as to what the plan might be, or that something big is coming down, and we didn't have the problem with media responding as quickly as they can today. Today, it would be much more difficult to maintain secrecy in the process of putting that plan together.
In writing the book, In Pursuit of Justice, which again is available at Amazon.com, real quickly, are there lessons from that book that young officers can learn from today?
Well, I hope so. I hope they read the story, take it to heart, to take out the to take with them the portions that we've already experienced, although it was some time back and things have changed somewhat. But the experiences we had dealing with large numbers of people and having small law enforcement groups, it was much closer to the public in terms of communications on a very regular basis. If you have a good communication with the public and you have trust from the public, it makes it a lot easier to solve crime and such because they're willing to step forward, with information. And that leads me to another, the Janet Rosh murder. That leaves a scar in my heart because that occurred back when I was sheriff. And we know that there's somebody out in the public that has information relative to that murder. They owe it to the family to give them some closure. Their names, the origin of the information will be kept from the media and from the public. But that family sure deserves some type of closure, and it's been just too long that they've been suffering, not knowing just who is responsible for their daughter's murder.
Real quickly, because we're almost out of time, Sheriff, you're back in central Wisconsin, which is why we're very fortunate to have had this special interview with you. Where are you going to be in the next few days if people want to come meet you and get a copy of your book?
Well, as soon as I hang up, we're heading out to Galloway to Gin and Tonics. So we'll be there for the crowd when the church lets out. We'll be meeting there from as soon as I get there till about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Tomorrow we'll be back here in Stevens Point at the library from 4 o'clock to 7:30. Then on Tuesday we'll be meeting here at the Moose Lodge in Stevens Point from 6 to 9 p.m. On Wednesday we'll go back to my roots in Shantytown. That's the northern part of Portage County, southern Marathon County at the line. We'll be meeting at Corky's there from 4 to 9 p.m., so some of my old friends and farmers can make it out there. And then the following next Friday, we'll be meeting at the Rochelle Library from 4 to 8 p.m. And I'll be closing the circuit on Monday. I'll be meeting with the Polish Legion of American Veterans at Harvey's in Ellis. That's where they normally meet. That's a monthly meeting, and I'm a life member there.
Well, Sheriff Dan Hintz, author of In Pursuit of Justice, may God bless you for all that you did when you served and continue to watch over you. And I hope people get a hold of a copy of the book and learn from the experience, because as the scriptures say, the older should teach the younger. And we appreciate you joining us today for this very special broadcast.
Well, it was certainly my pleasure, and God bless you, and God bless Portage and Marathon County, because they need it.
Again, my guest this morning, Dan Hintz, Sheriff, retired Portage County. His book, In Pursuit of Justice, you can get it at Amazon.com. And before I talk about what's coming up next and next week, we live in a time when people can live in fear. Now, fear for the Christian, for the one who knows Christ as Savior and knows where eternity is. As Sheriff Hintz's father taught him, you only die once. And according to the Scriptures, it is appointed unto men to die once. That's physical death, unless we're here when Jesus returns. But it is the one who can throw body and soul into hell that we're to fear. When we know Christ, and He knows us, we do not fear death. But while we're here, we're called to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before our God. We're called to watch and pray. And we're also called to submit and assist those in godly authority. And when we have that opportunity to do good to all men, whether it's those men and women in uniform, in law enforcement, our neighbors, when we do those things that are right and pleasing in the sight of God, we have answers to our prayers that are yes and amen. We do these things so that when we have people, like when Sheriff Hintz talked about 2 deputies in the county, he depended upon the public for help. When we are able to, we do submit to those in godly authority. And those who are serving us in law enforcement, even as former Sheriff Hintz said, have a tougher and tougher time. And we need to be in prayer for them, because their lives are on the line day in and day out, and whenever possible, to assist them. Coming up next on Experiencing the Word, Part 4 in my series of messages entitled The Life of the Believer. And next week on Christian Economic Perspective, again, we will look at an issue of economic, political, and social importance from a Christian worldview. And Lord willing, until then, walk with the King, be a blessing,